It was rough. Musicians union was there, but they weren't of much help at the time. I was never happy. I guess what drives me to tear things apart.
He transformed the guitar, inspired millions, and redefined rock itself. But beneath Eddie Van Halen's irresistible smile and brain-twisting solos was a history of rivalries few were even aware of. Six guitarists he respected, clashed with, and sometimes couldn't get along with. What fueled this secret tension between legends? And why did some of rock's all-time greats appear on Eddie's secret hate list? Come along with us and discover the six guitarists Eddie Van Halen disliked the most. Number 6, Eric Clapton. Before Eruption, before the ear-piercing crowds, there was a teenage Eddie Van Halen hanging out in his Pasadena bedroom with a cheap axe and a dog-eared stack of Cream albums. Night after night, he put the needle down on Crossroads, attempting to nail every bend and incendiary lick from Eric Clapton's Les Paul. Clapton wasn't merely an influence. He was why Eddie started playing the guitar. He once said to Guitar World, "Clapton was my biggest influence. I'd sit there hours to try and get a handle on what he was doing. I'd play that solo on Crossroads note for note. He was God to me." In those formative years, Eddie did not care about tone or songwriting or fame. He was concerned with knowing why Clapton's playing sounded alive. The pauses, the sustain, and the phrasing determined his musical DNA. But time has a way of altering things. By the late 1970s, Eddie Van Halen had done something even Clapton hadn't done. He redefined the electric guitar. When Eruption arrived, it sounded like it was from another planet. His two-handed tapping, harmonic squeals, and dive bombs redefined guitar technique. Overnight, this bashful kid from Pasadena was the future of rock. Fans adored him, but not everyone applauded. The old guard, musicians Eddie once worshipped, listened in disbelief. In 1980, when Clapton was questioned about Van Halen, he replied, leaving Eddie stunned. Clapton commented, "He's very good technically, but I don't hear much soul." It was a flippant comment, yet it hurt. To Eddie, it was heart-wrenching. The man who had influenced his style now labeled his music as mechanical. Years later, he confessed, "It kind of broke my heart. I learned everything from him. I wasn't trying to outplay him. I was inspired by him. To hear that he didn't like what I was doing really got to me." Eddie never shot back. He never dissed Clapton in interviews. Yet friends say he silently grappled with the disappointment and how bizarre it was to be rejected by his idol. Some of the conflict stemmed from philosophy. Clapton's guitar playing was constructed on restraint, a blues-derived approach where tone and phrasing were the narrative. Eddie's was all about freedom, distortion, feedback, and bold experimentation. They were, in a way, two generations. Clapton, the music of the 60s, Eddie, the music of tomorrow. But even amidst the agony, never once wavered the admiration. In 1995, Eddie conceded Clapton's tone on Crossroads, "That's still untouchable. I don't care what anybody says. That's pure feeling. You can't fake that." The two men actually did meet in Los Angeles in the mid-1980s. Eddie was excited, a fan meeting his hero for the first time. Clapton was friendly but aloof. They spoke of guitars, tone, and amplifiers, but not of feeling. Afterward, Eddie explained to a friend, "He's just a man. I think I love the myth more than the person." That experience transformed him. It was when Eddie no longer perceived legends as gods, but as men, great but imperfect. Subsequently, when interviewed whether Clapton's words still vexed him, Eddie chuckled quietly. "Nah, perhaps he didn't understand. Perhaps I didn't understand him either. We're from different planets, man." That line nailed them to A.T. Two guitar gods from alternate planets. Clapton wrote in blues and in shadows. Eddie painted neon across the sky. Following Eddie's death in 2020, Clapton was quoted as having spoken fondly of him in private, addressing him as a true innovator. Never once would he make public comment, but those fans who were familiar with their tale knew the gesture. By then, Eddie had long reconciled with it. In 2001, he explained to Guitar World, "If Clapton hadn't existed, neither would I. Whatever he thinks of me doesn't change that." By the end, Eddie's respect hadn't disappeared. It had evolved. "I'll always be chasing what I heard on those old Cream records," he once explained. That's where the fire started. Eddie's grief for Clapton went deep, but his subsequent feud burned more fiercely. This time, it wasn't dismay. It was straight-up rivalry. Two guitar gods, a single stage, and no space to bend. How does Eddie Van Halen square off against the dark sorcerer of the Stratocaster? Number 5, Ritchie Blackmore. Few experiences are more jarring for a young guitarist than encountering an idol, and particularly so when that idol is Ritchie Blackmore, the dark and mercurial mastermind of Deep Purple and Rainbow. For teenage Eddie Van Halen, Blackmore wasn't simply another rock musician. He was a tone prophet. Eddie would learn Burn and Highway Star note for note, playing them over and over until his fingers were raw. He envied Blackmore's precision in his solos, the aggression of his distortion, and that eerie sense of drama that pervaded each riff. Eddie saw Ritchie as one of the few who could actually get a guitar to sound alive. When Van Halen's first album blew up in 1978, Eddie found himself suddenly standing among the men he'd idolized growing up. He wasn't a teenager with a Strat copy in his bedroom anymore. He was a peer, a top-of-the-charts guitarist redefining the terms of rock. But the fantasy soured fast when he finally met one of his idols. In a 1982 interview with guitar players Jazz Obrecht, Eddie remembered their first meeting. "He just stared at me," said Eddie. "Wouldn't say hi, nothing. I was crushed. I thought, wow, I looked up to this guy my whole life, and he just blew me off." That silence cut deeper than any insult. Eddie wasn't arrogant, though. He was disarmingly frank, a man who could go on and on about gear and pickup wiring. He jammed with everyone and laughed easily. What lingered with him about Ritchie was the chill, the glazed stare, the absence of warmth, the complete lack of connection. Years later, Eddie mentioned it again. "People like Joe Perry and Ritchie Blackmore just gave me the shaft with their eyes," he told Rock and Roll Barrage. "Wouldn't say hello. Wouldn't be nice. No, nothing. I'm not that way." That phrase, "the shaft with their eyes," captured the sting perfectly. Eddie had just debuted Eruption, a solo that blew its way around the world of music, redefining guitar playing and causing every rock artist to reconsider what was possible. But his idols, the men whose posters used to paper his bedroom wall, regarded him with something less than rivalry, disdain. Some of it was due to Ritchie's personality. Blackmore was notoriously hard to get along with, even with members of his own group. His aura was constructed upon distance. And when he was quizzed years later about Van Halen, his response was both a compliment and a shot. "He's a good player," Blackmore declared, "but I think he plays too many notes." Supporters argued that remark for decades. Was it jealousy or retro snobbery? Actually, it exposed a more fundamental fault line, a divide between two periods of rock guitar. Blackmore's was defined by classical phrasing and restraint, where each bend and vibrato was purposeful. Eddie's was the opposite, loose, explosive, and unfettered. Where Ritchie cultivated precision, Eddie was freedom incarnate. It wasn't a feud so much as a generation standoff. Eddie embodied the new breed of Californian trendsetters who rigged out their amps, ordered bespoke guitars, and pursued tones that no one else had ever experienced. Blackmore was the last of the steadfast British hard rock traditionalists, his axe work grounded in order and structure. Nevertheless, Eddie never allowed that cold meeting to sour. Looking back in a 1995 interview with Guitar World with Understanding, "I was probably just too sensitive back then. Maybe he was shy or didn't know what to say. But man, I worshiped that guy growing up. Still do." And eventually, even Ritchie relaxed. In 2008, he said in Classic Rock magazine, "Eddie Van Halen brought something new. I can't deny that. What he did with the whammy bar, the tapping, it was clever. He found his own voice. It was acclaim, the very thing Eddie once longed for." Their careers parted, but they stayed bound to each other through influence. Blackmore drifted into medieval and Renaissance-hued melodies with Blackmore's Night, sacrificing aggression for elegance. Eddie remained fidgety, always experimenting with guitars and tone circuits, seeking the sound no one else could hear. And he did. By the time the world lost Eddie Van Halen in 2020, even the most devoted Blackmore supporters had come to accept what their idol finally acknowledged. He was brilliant. He found something that everyone else was trying to find. The accolades came decades too late, but for Eddie Van Halen, they were sufficient. But later, Eddie would experience another form of rejection, one boisterous, swaggering, and dripping with attitude. Number 4, Joe Perry. There was Van Halen in 1978, the new thunderstorm sweeping across the skyline of rock, raw, electric, and unstoppable. The band's first album had just started rattling the airwaves, and Eddie Van Halen, a mere 23, was still the hungry Pasadena kid seeking to prove himself worthy among the guitar gods. Every evening on the road, he shredded solos with relentless ferocity, as if his life depended on it. Yet behind the amps and blinding lights, something quietly pained him. The frigid indifference of the men he'd grown up adoring. Musicians like Aerosmith's Joe Perry. Eddie once told guitar players Jazz Obrecht in a 1982 interview how those early tours felt. People like Joe Perry would just give me the shaft with their eyes, he said. Wouldn't say hello. Wouldn't be nice. No nothing. I'm not that way. Picture this. You're the up-and-coming kid on the road, giving it everything you've got night in and night out. And when you do encounter the heroes whose photographs once lined your bedroom wall, they don't even give you a glance. No smile, no nod, just that cold, distant glare. Eddie believed that Perry and guys like Ritchie Blackmore perceived him as a threat. Later in the same interview, he stated succinctly they wouldn't go out of their way to help anybody cause they would feel threatened. It wasn't bitterness. It was an accurate reading of the generational split developing in the late 70s. Eddie's approach, fluid, ballsy, and based on invention, had redrawn the whole map of guitar playing. The old guard was blues swagger. The new one was speed, accuracy, and sonic adventure. Perry, a staple of 1970s hard rock, was based in a sound constructed on crunching riffs and raw power. His sound was thick, gritty, and sleazy, the score for Cigarette Smoke and behind-the-scenes anarchy. Eddie's, on the other hand, was lightning